Margaret,
you're sharing your time.
No, nobody's getting any of it. It's all mine.
Thank you.
I want to say thanks to the Labour Party for bringing this forward, and the motion actually does highlight the problem with the two-tier health system and the specific impact on the provision of care for the elderly in regards to home help hours. And indeed, there are facts and start statistics laid out in this motion in the one place in regards to what scandal of historic proportions this is when it comes to the care of our elderly. And that is not just in home help, but right across the system. We now have a system that has reversed from where we had 80% of care of the elderly in public hands and 20% in private, to the absolute opposite: 80% in private, 20% in public, and that's in the care home system. And last month was the month to raise awareness of older people's needs, and we actually don't seem to have been raised very high in our awareness. We're currently facing a system in the public system where Cherry Orchard Hospital is going to empty 2 wards and move 68 people out in the next 2 weeks. It's not acceptable. It won't be allowed to happen as far as the workers and the families are concerned. And I'm just saying that as a by the by. But in 2012, the home care system was dismantled, and the home help system that existed, because I live in Ballyfermot community, where it was very strong, was one where neighbours looked after neighbours, where they knew each other, where they were able to knock in on them frequently. It had its problems. People weren't trained properly. It needed upgrading, but it certainly didn't need the massive privatisation that followed, that put a focus on time pressure, that put a focus on low pay, on the profits of companies that moved in, and where you have people who need care and suffer from dementia, they often get 4 or 5 different people visiting them in the 1 week, and that still happens. And we don't know who's monitoring all of this privatised care. But I have to say there's a deep irony in the Labour Party putting this motion and highlighting it, given that they were in government with Fine Gael under Minister James Riley in 2012 when that system was dismantled and privatised. Having said that, the motion needs to say something further, which is that we need a nationalised healthcare system, especially when it comes to the care of the elderly in our society, and that must cover both home care and nursing home care. The staff should be public servants with sick pay schemes, with union representation, with career paths, and not be working for a provider that is privatised, putting them under pressure of time, all for the profit that they make. And that is the least that both the workers and the elderly deserve, and an absolute minimum demand of any left government in the future. The proliferation of private care of the elderly was a conscious decision of successive governments of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael since the foundation of the state, and in the last 3 decades with the adoption of privatisation and a neoliberal model, and of course they've been helped by others who joined them in coalition governments. But in recent decades, they've been encouraging the privatised firms to provide care for the elderly and the general health on a for-profit basis. The justification for this is absolute rubbish. They say it's more efficient, but it's not cheaper, not for the public purse, and it doesn't provide better services or care of our elderly people. And I've no doubt, Minister, and I've heard you already eulogise the spending on this aspect of health and the expansion of home care hours, but the historic reality is one of underfunding, a reliance on voluntary and religious provision of essential care, and it's no accident that we see Section 38 and 39 workers absolutely forced time and time again to demand pay parity and basic rights. There's an interesting fact here that under the OECD average, the Irish health spending per person under the public component is actually lower than many of the other countries. It's 73% in Ireland, 86% in Norway, 84% in Sweden, 84% in Denmark, 82% in the Netherlands. In other words, the public part of what we spent is much lower than other countries. Indeed, it's lower than the UK at 79%. In 2019, the HSE spent 31% of its budget on outsourcing to outside agencies, including religious for-profit organisations, home care providers and non-religious voluntary hospitals. And since the 1980s, the subsidised expansion of the private healthcare industry has created a powerful lobby of private hospitals, insurance companies, nursing homes, home care providers and their owners, and they are determined to block reform. Uniting them all is a shared class interest in perpetuating private ownership and control of healthcare and the right to profit from it. Julian Mercier in 2019 produced a report called The Growth of Private Home Care Providers in Europe. And he showed that as state policies in the area of home care provision and the amount of money received by private providers increased from 3 million in 2006 to 176 million in 2019. Private providers had more than 80 members employing a total of 14,000 carers, and industry sources estimate that approximately 75% of private providers' revenue is obtained from public sources. So how is that more efficient, cheaper, better for workers or better for the elderly? The funding for private home care provision has shifted from the HSE to private operators in a big way. The top 5 home care providers received grants of 128 million and accumulated profits of 2.3 million. The parent companies of the top 3 providers received HSE grants and are based outside of Ireland, in Switzerland, France and the United States. And the previous owners of Bluebird, who are now the Clemic Home Care Services, were paid nearly $1 million by the state in 2018. And during the pandemic, a survey carried out by Carers Ireland found that 450 qualified public and private carers who responded to a survey said they were earning €12 an hour or less. And I met many of them during the pandemic. They put themselves at great risk to continue to do their work of caring for our elderly at home. And I too want to thank them and praise them for doing that. So what we have is a private for-profit sector which absolutely needs a dysfunctional public system to survive and profit. And this state has continually abdicated its responsibility for providing basic and fundamental services in healthcare for the people of this country under successive Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael governments, which we've had since the foundation of the state. That too needs to change.